So I just want to check there that you guys can hear me okay up the back. Just give me a wave if you can hear me up the back of the room. Fantastic. So David assured me that the audio in the room you've got there, the AV, was top notch. So it looks like it really is. So as far as the introduction goes, so David did a really great introduction there. So my role is I'm a DevOps architect on the DevOps CAT team at Microsoft. I joined Microsoft back in April after being self-employed for 23 years. So that was quite a change. And what I do now is kind of what I did previously, just for a different employer. I go and deliver 2-week high-touch, fast-track engagements for Microsoft's top customers. So I go there and sort of look at their DevOps processes, practices, tooling, and see how we can improve that to give them the best value that we can. And I'm with a financial services company in Sydney, wrapping up a 2-week fast track for them at the moment. I was a DevTools MVP for 13 years before taking on that role. And as part of that, I travel a lot. So for anyone out there that does some travel, TripIt's a great little tool for keeping track of your flights and your travel details. Not so good when you look at some of the statistics. So in the last 9 years, I've been on the road for over 2,000 nights and traveled over 2 million kilometres. So it's quite daunting when you look at it that way. But it's been, it's a great part of my job to travel, see the world, and help people in lots of different places. So anyway, that's enough about me. So just a little bit about the presentation. So when we did the rebranding, relaunch of VSTS, or Visual Studio Team services, into Azure DevOps, the product team, marketing team, basically put together a deck of slides, some swag that David's sharing there with you. And really, the purpose of the deck and what we wanted to talk about was really around what's changed with the product. So for some of you, I would suspect that not a lot has really changed. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of things I can share with you over the evening, and I'll probably finish up the presentation by jumping into our production systems and showing you, how we release Azure DevOps using Azure DevOps. If anyone's interested, I'll show you our pull requests, some of our tests. I'll give you a look behind the scenes if anyone's interested. That said, I'd be really curious to find out a little bit more about the audience there. My goal will be to kind of just high-level walk through each of the different key product areas. Some of you are probably familiar with some of these things, and what I'd like to do, though, is to show you some of those things and then just take some questions. Even though I can't be there in the room, I'd like this to be as interactive as we can possibly make it. That way you guys get to just hopefully each take away something really interesting and valuable to each of you. So in the room there, if you can just raise your hand, who's used Team Foundation Server in the past or is still using TFS? That looks like most of the room. Excellent. Who's now moved over to either VSTS or Azure DevOps as it's now known? Okay, it's looked like about half there by the look of it, give or take. Fantastic. Who reckons we should change the name again? All right. Yes, that's what I expected there. Okay, so and I would suspect, I don't know if I can easily ask this as a question, I would suspect that quite a few of you have got, we've probably got the full spectrum of users, from people that have used it a little bit to people that have used it a lot. So I'll try and make sure I can throw something of value in there to cover the whole spectrum. It's not a particularly technical deck that we would normally go through with the relaunch, but I'll hopefully throw some technical nuggets in there, or maybe in response to a couple of good technical questions you could throw at me. So just a reminder that Microsoft's definition of DevOps comes from Donovan Brown, and that's DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our users. Okay, we care about outcomes more so than outputs. If we do a talk on the metrics that we measure, things on our engineering scorecard, for example, we really care more about LSIs, live-site incidents, and hopefully the lack of them. We care a lot more about NSAT, and Net Promoter Score values, we care a lot more about those than we do about a team's velocity, for example, or the number of bugs that a team has. So we've really changed the focus of how our internal teams within Azure DevOps work, in line with, I guess, DevOps best practices out there. All right. Now, this isn't to say that this is the best definition of DevOps. It's certainly not the only one, but it's the one that, as an organization, Microsoft have basically found resonates most with us. So who's ever looked at a State of DevOps report from DORA? Who's read that or seen some of the details? Okay. Well, this is something that you should all really go and have a look at. So the State of DevOps report is produced by DORA. It's sponsored by various different organizations. Historically, I know Puppet was a big sponsor. I know that they weren't invited to sponsor again this year. We don't need to go into those details there. But DORA includes people like Nicole Forsgren, Gene Hummel, Jess Hummel, should I say, Gene Kim, names that you might be familiar with things like, the Phoenix Project book. There's also a book called Accelerate, which is also a really, really good read from the same group of authors. But what these guys do is they're the DevOps research and assessment group. It's a very small group, and they collect an enormous amount of information about DevOps. In previous years, they've basically compared organizations that don't do DevOps with organizations that do DevOps. And that's okay. You'd expect there would be quite a big chasm between the two. What they've done differently this year is in Accelerate, they've compared organizations doing DevOps from the high performance. So it's not enough today just to say, yes, we're doing DevOps, but what's it mean to do DevOps and excel in that area? And what's the difference between them? So our high-performing DevOps organizations do 46 times more frequent deployments. It's become not the big deal that it once was. We're going to deploy on a Friday, and everyone groans. Nowadays, high-performing DevOps organizations, you want to do a deploy? Fine. You want to do 10 deploys? Even better. Deployments aren't things to be feared. That's quite a cultural change. And, for a lot of teams that I go into, even teams, well, I haven't mentioned any names, so the teams I'm in today with this customer, you talk about a deployment and a release, and there's almost a look of fear and horror on their faces, all the different things they've got to go through, the processes, the change requests, the technical challenges. That's crying out for some DevOps love, in my opinion. If you have a look down the bottom there, a 7 times lower change failure rate. Part of DevOps is basically the idea that we've got to, we can't fear change. We want to go and make changes. We've got to, in terms of delivering value to our customers more frequently, that's all about change in increasing our value. We want to make those changes more frequently. Look at that staggering figure, 2,550 times, 55 faster lead times for changes, okay? And then down the bottom, the faster mean time to recover. We all work in IT. We know stuff breaks, whether it's an issue with the cloud, whether it's the issue we had with Azure DevOps in South Central in the US earlier last month. Things break, okay? We can do a lot of different things. The financial investments that as a team Azure DevOps are making now to deal with one of the root cause of the outage that we had in South Central is a staggering amount of money, well into the millions of dollars around re-architecting some things. Fundamentally, it was a surge caused by lightning, an act of nature. Things happen. So embrace that. And what we look at is how quickly can we recover? Okay, these are the real big measures. They're not new, mean time to detect, mean time to recover, but what can we do? So there's some pretty good figures there. Just go back there. It's literally DORA State of DevOps report and Accelerate's the 2018 version. So if you go looking for those keywords, you'll find it. So internally at Microsoft, if we go back and have a look at Team Foundation Server, TFS, it was a boxed product. We built it using waterfall. We typically had large releases every couple of years. So you'll look at 2005, 2008, 2010. You go and ship 2008 and we have collected information. We go and build the application, we deploy it. We deploy it, we box it up and we give it to you guys. You guys deploy it. If there was something you wanted that we didn't get into the product, don't worry, it's in the next version. That was 2.5 years later before 2010 shipped. We can't have those kinds of cycles anymore. So the Azure DevOps team, that's about 800 engineers across 45 feature teams. So we had to change, we had to adapt ourselves, and we had to quickly learn what it was like to actually operate a cloud-hosted service. Microsoft was born in 1975. That predates the cloud as we know it by a long shot, a long time. A lot of our competitors were born in the cloud. They were born in cloud cadence. They didn't have on-premises products. They basically were born as a SaaS offering. So moving an organization the size and complexity of Microsoft across to cloud was quite the challenge. How are we going? Well, right now, Azure DevOps is the tool chain of choice for about 96,000 internal users. Do we deploy often every day? Yeah, I think we do that pretty well. We deploy 85,000 times every day. We do something like 2 million Git commits per month, 4.4 million builds a month. And then one of my favorites, we do 500 million tests a day. Now, it's a big organization. That's a lot of engineers. Put the numbers into perspective. But there's some pretty staggering numbers there. 5 million work items get viewed every single working day across our organization. Okay, so we build Azure DevOps using Azure DevOps. We use it exclusive. Well, I shouldn't say exclusively. That's not. I can't confirm or deny that. We use it hopefully almost exclusively internally. Our One Engineering systems, our One ES projects are certainly trying to make that the case, but still some good numbers there. Okay. So Azure DevOps, the relaunch, guys, it's a lot more than just rebranding. Most of our customers will see it as simply a rename. And if we were to go into our source repository and do a global find and replace, wow, that would have been quick and easy. This has taken an enormous amount of work because it was a lot more than just rebranding and a rename. We've re-architected these services. We've made these services virtually independent. Some of them are quicker than others. The first one you'll see is Azure Pipelines. So today you could go into GitHub, for example. You could log on with a GitHub ID. You could go into the GitHub marketplace and type in Azure Pipelines. If it's an open source project, you'll then get 10 concurrent build pipelines, unlimited build minutes, and you'll be able to use Azure Pipelines without anything else. Okay, you'll just use GitHub as you've always used it. You'll commit your changes to GitHub, and then behind the scenes, Azure Pipelines can pick up those source changes, provision the build infrastructure, build your application, give you those artifacts. We do that today. So if any of you are working on open source projects with GitHub and you need a tool that's going to go and build and release, or at least in this case, build code for you, Azure Pipelines does that. So as we make each of these available as a separate offering, perhaps, Azure Boards, our goal wasn't to build a Trello compete, but if you want just to have a high quality customizable board experience to help you manage work, then you might consider Azure Boards, and that'll be available separately. So it was really what we called internally the verticalization of the product, so that these could basically stand alone. Okay, that's been an enormous amount of work. Okay, so yes, a little bit more than just a name change. And name changes are always great. It's always going to polarize your customer base. Some people will love it, some people will hate it. and it's going to be those two extremes that you hear a lot from. And then you've got the people in the middle that just roll with it. It's a name. The other thing that was changed was the navigation. So the new navigation, the new experience was turned on by default for our users. That was mixed. That was a mixed blessing. The goal was that most things should have been quicker and easier and resulted in fewer clicks. We've generally done well there, but it hasn't been perfect. So from my own personal experience, I can confirm that there are definitely some workflows that will be more clicks than they were. There'll also be other things where, I've trained muscle memory over, years of using the mouse, and now things have changed, like, damn it. So there's that little bit of frustration while I retrain, my mouse to go in the right direction. So that's been interesting. So I wanted to go through each of these. All I wanted to do, in terms of the deck, what we're going to do is provide a high-level overview of what the capability is, although many of you will relate that back to your TFS or to Azure DevOps for you. We might get into a demonstration there, and I'll see what I can show in the limited time we've got. Then I'll throw it out to you to ask questions. So if you've got any questions, thoughts, comments there, please make it as interactive as possible, and hopefully that'll make it a good, interesting session for you. So Azure Boards. So Azure Boards is really our work item tracking system. So this is where we've got the ability to create and work with our product backlogs. This is where we can define our sprints, do our planning and so forth, where we have our Kanban boards that are customizable, where we have our sprint boards to manage the work that we're doing. Okay, we've improved the UI experience. We've improved the responsiveness of that UI, in my opinion, quite significantly in the more recent releases. If we have a look at what that looks like, little mousie's had a sleep, there we go. So if we were to jump across, let's have a look here. So what we're looking at now is Azure DevOps. I've just used the demo generator to go and create Parts Unlimited for us. Okay, so that there's some data in there. So the first thing is that new navigation experience down the left-hand side. It just takes a few clicks to get used to. And I suspect that for many of you, in making the change to Azure DevOps, or when that changed, it's really just about finding those key things, those menu items and so on, that may have changed or existed in a different place. While we're on this screen, notice that we've got this little private up there. So public projects are things that we've added in the last few months. So you can now go and create truly public projects. If you wanted to host an open source project using Azure DevOps, you can do so. And really changing that from private to public turns off authentication. Basically says anyone can now come here and work with our work items. Okay, so that's something I'll call out for you. Across the top here, we've got the dashboard experience for boards. Okay, let's jump into there. Okay, and what you see here is all these work items that are assigned to me. Okay, it's the experience that's changed here a little bit. Okay, I can go across into my backlog view. Okay, I can see my team backlogs here. And my guess is that the majority of you should be quite familiar with working with the product backlog here. This planning panel has a different look and feel to how it looked previously. So if I go up here and change my view options, I can go into my mapping. Okay, so that would allow me to see my PBIs, or product backlog items. And then I can see the parents on the right-hand side. We've had mapping before. It's just how we get access to it. If I want to reparent one of these PBIs, I can pick it up, drag it across to a new parent, and when I let go, that'll change that parent-child relationship between them. In terms of seeing those future sprints, that was always something that was debated. I know that people from scrum.org were always quite adamant that we shouldn't be able to see future sprints. You certainly shouldn't be able to assign work to future sprints. That was always kind of one of their bugbears. And the reality is that we've actually put, as an organization, we've found a lot of value in looking at a 3-sprint horizon. So most of the Azure DevOps teams will generally always work 3 sprints out. So we've got the current sprint, and we keep an eye on 3 sprints ahead. We have basically a confidence. So we're 95% confident what we're going to do in the next sprint, 80% confident, then 60% confident 3 sprints out. But we do keep that horizon there, and our team is always able to talk about what we're going to be doing in the next 3 sprints. Okay, we've found that that's worked really well for us. Does anyone have an opinion on that? Agree, disagree? Think it's a good idea? Yeah, a couple of nods, a couple of not sures. That's all right. Okay. Anything really interesting here and new? I think we've got that standardization for that filter. That's been, I think that's quite nice in the current UI. So mostly wherever you see lists where previously we'd let you go into those headings, we'll now just show that little consistent filter panel across the top. I think that's been an improvement in the UI. When we go into our sprints down here, what calls out to me here as being new or different, you'll see that we've got the ability to see what our current sprint is, look at our previous sprints, future sprints there. But the general functionality of what you're seeing on this board really hasn't changed a lot. Does anyone have any questions about the sprint boards, task boards as you previously know them? Nope, sounds like you were all really familiar with boards, which is great. Under capacity, any real changes there? Not really. I've never really been a big fan of using this capacity. I'm curious, how many of you actually use the capacity? Go and add your team members here, specify team days off, specify the type of activities the team member does. Does anyone use this? Got 1, 2, 3 hands. Interesting. I am curious. So in saying that you are using it, are you finding that it adds value, or are you doing it because you've been told to do it? Adding value? Okay. That's good. If it's adding value, good, please keep using it. I don't mean there's absolutely no judgment there. I've just found that a lot of organizations that look at it really use it for a little while, and then it tends to atrophy more because team members, when they go and create their tasks, generally don't bother going and specifying an activity or breaking the tasks into the hours and so forth. So that's really probably more the reason, not a technical problem, but more of a usability that drives people away from it.
With that one, I have played with it a bit, and it's sort of like, oh, I'm putting my leave in here, and I'm putting my leave in somewhere else, and I'm putting my Outlook calendar, and so it's kind of nice to have that sort of integrated in there, so you feel like you're repeating yourself so much.
Yeah, and that's something else that I know that's been on the wish list for a little while. They want a lot of that information to automatically inherit from the project. So for example, particularly like public holidays. If it's a public holiday, every team shouldn't need to go in and specify those team days off, but you have to today. So I know that that's on the backlog, the wish list, to be able to sort of inherit a lot of that information, or to be able to, I mean, you can copy it from the previous sprint, but that's not the same thing. And we want to be able to do it for all teams in a project. So that's something that they've talked about. If we have a look at our work items here, if we look at creating a new work item, let's just see if there is anything that stands out to us. Let's go and say I want to create a PBI. So looking at the screen there, we've had that new layout now for quite a while. So that probably, anything there that sticks out as new and interesting? Not really. Actually, let's see if I can find something that you guys haven't seen before.
The editor.
Sorry, what was that?
The description of the editor.
Okay. Who uses keyboard shortcuts? Who knows there are keyboard shortcuts for the boards and all these different things? And then the big question, who knows how to get that screen up? All right, excellent. So I can show you guys something about the boards. So if you basically do your shift question mark on any of the boards, you'll actually see that screen. So if you are a big fan or user of keyboard shortcuts and you want to know what they are, your question mark on the board brings up all those little screens for you, and you can get a full list of them if you go to the bottom right-hand corner. There you go. A little tip, a piece of trivia and advice for you. Over the last 6 months, the current iteration in a query, is that new for us? If I go in here and say, and the iteration path, helps if you actually type it correctly, is equal to, if I choose current iteration, this probably arrived, I think, 6 months ago, you can say current iteration, the next iteration, or the previous iteration. Okay. If I say the current iteration, notice that it pops down and it says the current iteration for what team. So I then need to go and identify the team to give that current iteration context. Okay, but it's sometimes nice to be able to say, I want to run a query of all PBIs currently in the next iteration, or what were the bugs from the previous iteration, please. So I think that was a reasonably interesting little again, a subtle change, but that came in quite handy for quite a lot of people. All right, I think that's it for boards. Let's get out of boards. All right, so Azure repos, as you know them. So in terms of Azure repos, so repos is really our code repositories. And with our code repositories, we support a TFVC. So if an organization wants to use centralized version control and is a TFVC user, then they're fully supported. If the organization wants to use distributed version control with Git, then of course that's fully supported as well. So Azure repos is really just that source control provider. And of course, with the acquisition of GitHub, well, that's going to be just another option. At the moment, the general guidance seems to be, if the organization's currently using GitHub and they're happy with it, they should keep doing that. If the organization's currently using Azure Repos Git infrastructure and they're happy with it, then they should continue to do so. I don't think Microsoft is going to, in the foreseeable future, try and drive customers one way or the other. I know that, for example, the social experience around GitHub is a lot nicer. Some of the workflows that they've got on GitHub seem to be much nicer for people that are familiar with those things. So maybe that will become an extra option in here. In terms of Azure repos, in the audience there, who's using centralized version control, TFVC at work? Yeah, great. And the rest, I assume, then a Git. We're seeing some really interesting improvements around Git experiences, the Git pull requests and merging. So if we jump back over to our example here, if I go into my repos, you'll see that I've got some content here already. What I might do is just go through a simple sort of clone, branch, PR experience, branch policies, walk through that and see if that raises any questions. If there's something there that you see that's not familiar to you or that is interesting, that'd be a very common kind of configuration. So call out if there's any questions there. So I'm going to start by going in and cloning my repo. You'll see there that I can choose to clone it. I could grab the URL, jump into PoshGit or a Git command line client. I can choose from any of these clients that I see here, VS Code, Visual Studio, Android Studio. I'll say that I want to clone this using Visual Studio. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to grab a copy of that repo that's currently sitting up in Azure DevOps and bring that down to my local machine. I'll just take a second for Visual Studio to open up. I think I'm running on .3. I don't think I got .4 down today, David. All right. I figured I shouldn't pull down a gig on my customer's internet. I'll wait till I get back to the office to do that. All right, let's go ahead and where would I like to put that? I'll go and drop that onto, say, the D drive, Azure Repos. That'll do. And let's call that Adelaide Parts Unlimited. Okay, so I'm just choosing to go and do that clone using the Visual Studio IDE to do that instead of going and doing it from a command line. That's a personal preference, I guess, for most people, whichever one you like. That shouldn't take more than about a minute, I think. It's not a particularly big repo. And what I'm going to do is I'll walk through what I would generally recommend as a better practice for working on these things. And you know, I'll ask you guys to offer an opinion there. Maybe you agree or disagree. And done. All right. So what I could easily do here is I could go in, open up the repository, go and make a trivial change. I could go and commit that directly using Visual Studio here. That'd be nice and easy. What I want to show is probably a better workflow. Within the Azure DevOps team, we pretty much will always work out a master. After going from the days of TFVC, where we had multiple full-time engineers whose sole purpose was to do branching and merging through TFVC, which was extraordinary. That was fraught with danger. It took ages for us to do our mergers. Our mergers were high risk. Our mergers resulted in lots and lots of bugs. We now basically do everything to master, okay, within a Git repo. So if I go back to my boards for a moment, so I'll just switch back to my board. Let's go into find a task, and let's look at how we might work today with a given task. So I'll go in and have a look at my sprint backlog. And again, this isn't necessarily the best or only way. This is just a way that I seem to find works with many customers. I'd be interested in the feedback you guys have. I'll go and choose one of my sprints, go and find a task to work on. Okay, so here's a given task. I find myself more and more often turning on show IDs. Okay, so a simple little change there is going to show the work item ID. Okay, so I want to work on this particular task. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, go and create a new branch. Okay, and what I want is I'm going to have a lot of short-lived branches. Okay, so I create a new branch. Notice that by doing it this way, it's automatically found the work item I want to link to. And I would often choose, okay, in my example, I've chosen an unparented one. That's Murphy's Law. If this was part of a user story, a PBI, I'd also generally choose to link that as well. What name would you give your branch? Okay, don't call it Dev, don't call it Anthony, don't call it any of those things. More and more often, I'm basically saying, well, let's call this one task 1102. The name of my branch relates directly to the task I'm working on. Okay, so it's instantly recognizable and can't be easily confused. I'm going to base this branch from Parts Unlimited, my master, and I'll go ahead and say create branch now. So it's created that branch. You'll see it there. Task 1102 is the branch. I could go and do this in Visual Studio, but it's much quicker for demoing if I do it here inside the browser. I'm going to go ahead and go and find a random file, and we'll make a change. Okay, so I'm changing this, doing whatever the task was. I'm going to make that change in my branch, do a quick edit. And my edit will be really boring and also very safe. Boring. And I'll commit that change. Okay, so it's going to commit that into the branch. And I know that it's that particular task. That was convenient because, of course, the task name showed that for me. I'll choose commit. Okay, so in committing that locally, I'm going to now go and choose to create a pull request. So a nice short-lived branch, tasks should be 3 hours or less. It could be multiple commits, but for now I'll do my create my PR. I can go and put additional details and information in there. I can choose who I want to do the review. And in my simple example, I'm going to have to review my own work, which is generally a really bad idea. It knows the work item here. I can go and read that if I want to. I can see the files. So let's go and create the PR. Now, because I've said that I want to approve that myself, that really bad idea, what you'll see here is the approval process. So whoever the reviewer or reviewers are, they can go in here, have a look at the files, review the changes. They can make comments in here if they want to do so. I can have a look at the updates, okay? Because remember, it's not always just a single commit. It could be multiple commits. I can go and examine what those things are. I can go and put comments in there, okay? Notice that I've got that rich text experience in pretty much any large text box these days across the UI. I can come up here and choose to approve it with suggestions. I can wait for the author. I can reject it if I want to. Like, this is what code review looks like for Git users. I'll say that I want to go and approve that on this occasion. And then I'll complete that pull request. When I complete the pull request, do you want to complete the linked work items? That's your choice. So if I'm confident that this has now been reviewed, it's going to be pulled in to master. If that completes the task, sure, go ahead and move it to complete. The next question is, do you want to delete that short-lived branch? Yeah, absolutely. Why do I need to keep that around? So I'm going to choose to delete that short-lived branch straight after the merge. Now that's going to happen up on the origin, okay, in this case in Azure DevOps. Technically speaking, that branch still resides on my local Git repo. It's going to be in my database. That's fine. I'll complete the merge. Okay, the merge is in progress, and that's now been completed. Okay, as a typical workflow there. Now, to get the best value out of this, I want to take advantage of branch policies. Okay, and I'll show you these various pieces, and then when I jump across and show you what that looks like behind the scenes in Microsoft, this will make a little bit more sense to you. And what I'm about to show you is critical for the success of how we work on a large team with 800 engineers. I'll go across to my repos, project settings, go down to my repositories, now what I want to do is I want to set up some rules so that if people want to get things into master, they must meet these rules. So I go in and I'll choose master, and you'll see that I've got branch policies here. So if any of my developers want to get the code into master, I can set some policies here. I can say there must be a minimum number of reviewers. I can set that value. Allow users to approve their own changes. Well, by default, that should be a no. I can allow completion even if some reviewers vote waiting or reject. I don't think that's a good idea. I can go and check for linked work items. So for traceability, is this required or optional? Should I prompt them or should I require it? Do I want to check for comment resolution? Do I want to force a particular Git merge strategy? Do I want to prevent fast forward merges? Do I want to, force them to do squash merges to try and keep it a little cleaner? They're your choices. This one here, build validation. When I went and made that edit to that file, did I build it locally? Did I make sure my unit tests ran or anything like that? Well, I should have as a good developer, but I didn't. So I can go and specify a build policy. I can say that we want to go and choose a particular build pipeline. I can set up some filters. I can trigger it. And I can basically say that when a developer does a pull request, go and trigger the build, compile it, run my unit tests, and only if those things succeed will the pull request go to the reviewers. If any of that stuff doesn't work, don't even bother giving it to the reviewers. Okay, So keep that in mind when I show you what we do behind the scenes. Just the sheer volume of testing we do before any of the reviewers actually get to see the changes is quite staggering. Okay, so you've got control, and there's other choices. I can go and specify other policies. I can go and specify automatic reviewers. If I'm the technical team lead on this project, I can add myself or other people as mandatory reviewers before people are able to do a PR into master. Okay. Have a look at that yet? No, not yet. I'll save that until closer to the end of the session. All right, just in walking through some of those characteristics of Azure Repos, does anyone have any questions about it? Anything that caught your eye? Nope. All very quiet. Okay. Azure Pipelines. So Azure Pipelines is really the bundling up of our build and release capabilities. More and more the lines are getting blurred between build and release, although they've kind of always been a little blurred. And what I mean by that is we can, now in a build pipeline, you can deploy. In a release pipeline, you can go and do compilation tasks and run unit tests if you want to. We have a common set of tasks that are available across all of them. So in our pipelines, I think it's quite a compelling offering in that I think we're probably the only cloud provider that gives you full access to Linux agents, Windows agents, and Mac OS agents. So technically speaking, you could create a single pipeline that deploys across all three of those platforms, that builds on those platforms, okay? Single pipeline potentially that does all of those builds for us, which I think is quite extraordinary, okay? Here's a little reminder of that offer for open source projects, which is the most, I think, the most generous offer of all of the CI options. If you've got open source projects, we're going to give you unlimited build minutes for those projects, and we're going to give you 10 concurrent pipelines for all three of those platforms completely free of charge. Okay, so I think that's quite generous, to a point where I think they've actually put that slide into the deck twice. They really like us to make a big deal of that. Here's the integration we've got with GitHub. So when you're in GitHub natively, you can go into the GitHub Marketplace, search for Azure Pipelines, say you want to set up a new plan, and you can do this all without going anywhere near Azure DevOps. Okay. And we're seeing a lot of enhancements here. Okay, so we're going to have bidirectional information. So when the builds are finished, we feed that information back. Here we are setting up a plan for public private repos, completely free. If you want, you can then, if it's a non-open source project, you can then go and buy those pipelines if you want to. And that's done. Okay, so that's quite nice integration. All right, let's have a look at what that looks like. So what I might do is I might talk about how we do some things and also let you know about a private preview that you might be interested in. As security becomes more and more important, internally we've got quite a large number of tools that take care of a lot of the static security scanning for our applications. If I go in here and say I want to create a new pipeline, I'll say it's a Git pipeline, I'll say continue. I can go and say that I want to create YAML. If YAML's your thing, that's fine. But for me, I'll say ASP.NET because that's what Parts Unlimited is. Okay. So I'll go ahead, and what you've got here is just a completely stock standard build from that ASP.NET template. After we've got the code, but before we do the build, I might want to go and do things. So this is giving you a look into some things we've got available or coming up. I might want to go and check to make sure that my developers have not included any credentials, any secrets in code. Looking around the room, Hands up if you've never, ever put a password in source code. No hands? Or a personal access token, even if it's a test password or username. You know, these are generally not great things. Okay, so what I want to do is, how about we put that in our pipelines? Let's go and do some scanning to check those things. Azure test plans. So Azure test plans is really hasn't changed a lot for us. It's still the solution for for manual testing. We want to have our unit tests in place. We want TDD. We want our build pipelines to go and run those tests for us. But there's still a lot of organizations for whom, you know, we still have human manual testers that want to go in there and run test cases. They want to go and do exploratory testing, and Azure Test Plans is exactly that. We've got some nice reporting capabilities in there. Okay, who's never used the testing capabilities that have been in the product for a little while, even perhaps before it was Azure Test Plans? You've been able to create manual tests. Has anyone never seen it? Or, sorry, ask a better question, who has used it? Okay, just a few people there. Okay, so let's have a very quick look at that. So if we go back over and have a look, okay, down to the second from last. So if I go down to my test plans, I can create a test plan. And generally speaking, your test plans are going to be linked or related specifically to an iteration. So I'm currently in my sample data working on Sprint 2. So a logical name for this test plan is probably Sprint 2. Okay, that way there's a good correlation between the testing effort and the effort the rest of the team are doing. Okay, so I'll probably keep the same names there. So it creates that test plan. When a developer, you know, when the team go and grab the PBIs, the user stories they're going to work on in the sprint, the developers then tend to grab those PBIs and break them down into tasks, task decomposition. At the same time, our testers will go and look at the requirements that have been allocated to this particular sprint. I'll go in there and say, give me a list of all PBIs in the current iteration. Or in my case, I'll just choose it. And we'll see that there are 2 PBIs. Okay, I'll select both of those PBIs and then say create suites. And what that's done is it's created, let's think of them as folders. They're test suites. So for this particular PBI, here are my test cases or test case. It's currently assigned to Anthony. I can go in there and say I want to go and add a new test case. And these are manual tests, remember. Historically, they've been written in Word or Excel. And what they are is attempt to add multiple items to the cart. And then we can put our steps there. Okay, step 1. Open the browser. Nice typing. Add item to the cart. This should be the result. And then close the browser. You'd probably do a little bit better than that. I'll go ahead and save and close it. Okay. David, someone at the door there? All right. And if I want to run that test, I can choose to go and run it. That's going to pop open a browser window for me. And that's going to give me those steps to do. So as a human manual tester, I opened the existing one. It says launch the application and log in. This is what should happen. So I go and open the application and that worked. Go and click categories. That worked. And then I can choose to fail a step. Say what went wrong. I can go and raise and create bugs directly from here. And that gives us that nice traceability. I'll go and save and close that for now. And notice that it's failed. Okay. When you've done this, and I go and have a look at things like my Kanban board, these test results and test suites appear on the Kanban board. So you can look at the requirement, have a look at the tasks and which tasks are done and which ones aren't. Look at the test cases and see how many test cases are there, how many test cases have passed or are currently failing. Okay.
So the person's role of running the tests and raising bugs, as you just demonstrated, for example, that's not necessarily someone who's a developer. There'd usually be a tester, which might be a representative from the business. In that scenario, with that person, how would they actually edit these test cases and raise bugs, for example? Do you actually need to give them access to Azure DevOps? Do they need to have an identity or an account?
Yes.
So you would pre-set up Jane Tester as an account on Azure DevOps, and that's how she'd log in and run her tests, for example.
Yes.
Okay.
And it costs you money.
Yes, it does. So
Okay.
to get the testing capabilities as a standalone feature, you would go and add them and give them, it's an extension from the marketplace. And if my memory serves me, it's probably around about $60 per user per month for the testing capabilities.
Okay, yep. All right. And that sort of leads into my next question, which is a bit more general. At my work, we're using TFS 2018 as our source control repository, and we manage and build our solutions out of that, and we use a third-party tool for agile project planning. So we do sprints and backlog items, work items, and so forth, test management through a third-party SaaS product. And we're looking at moving our TFS 2018 infrastructure into Azure DevOps. So that would involve moving all our on-premise source control repositories into the cloud and onto Azure DevOps. What's your recommendations for how we tackle this project?
Okay, so what kind of repositories is it? Are you using TFVC or are you using Git?
We're using TFS 2018 on-premise as our source control, and Visual Studio 17.
Yeah, that's okay. It didn't answer the question though, because TFS supports both TFVC, centralized version control, or Git for distributed version control. Which of those two are you using in TFS?
It would be TFVC.
TFVC, okay, gotcha. So there are, okay, so it's not easy.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, sorry, I wish that was a different answer too, by the way. Let me explain why it's not easy.
Well, let's go back 3 years ago. I mean, Azure DevOps didn't exist, or TFVS didn't even exist. So everybody was using, and the cloud was still in infancy in terms of source control. So Microsoft houses were using on-premise servers for version control. And please correct me if I'm wrong. So how did these software houses move fast forward 3 years and utilize the cloud for their infrastructure?
Sure. I mean, I didn't say it wasn't possible. I just said it wasn't easy. Because the challenges you've got is, how do you deal with user identities in TFS? It's just normal Active Directory, isn't it?
That's right.
So when you go to Azure, you don't have your Active Directory. So you're basically, as part of going to Azure DevOps, you've got to change your identity provider from on-prem AD to Azure Active Directory.
Well,
okay.
Assuming we have Office 365 for Active Directory integration, does that help?
Yes, it does help a lot. Okay. So once you've got Azure, in your case, once you've got Office 365, that means you've got AAD. So then the next question, it then comes back to a user mapping scenario. So presumably your TFVC has history that goes back maybe 10 years or 5 years even, doesn't matter. So when you move that to the cloud, there's going to be user accounts there that no longer exist. I mean, you're not going to be paying for them in AAD. So the best thing to do there is to look at a user mapping file to choose what you want in certain scenarios. And that's okay. Then you can do a high fidelity migration. So there's a tool that will actually help you do that migration up to the cloud. So once you've got one of the hardest things done. So you've already got AAD. So then I'd use the migration tool, and what they can do is you basically grab your team project collection. There's a caveat here. Yep. You grab your team project collection, you simply upload that straight to Azure DevOps, and it will give you the full high fidelity migration for you. It takes just a wee little bit of work. The other challenges you've got is, remember, your on-prem TFS, you'll have your on-prem agents, so they'll need to be reconfigured to use the cloud, and your Visual Studio clients will need to be reconfigured to use the cloud as well.
Okay, so is there the possibility of perhaps there being a hybrid approach where we can use Azure DevOps for its project management capabilities and boards, and then maintain our on-premise source control to integrate? No. That's not an option?
No.
Okay. All
right. And I don't know that it's a scenario. I mean, part of the goal of going to Azure DevOps is to use a SaaS offering and not have to worry about keeping that server up to date. So you don't really want a hybrid scenario where you've got source down here with Active Directory and then work items and things in the cloud with Azure Active Directory. It's never going to be a pretty story.
Okay, so is there actually a recommended documentation or practice for how to approach this, or could you provide?
Yep.
Get that info?
So the team lead's name's Rogan, and I'm trying to think it's the VSTS migration tool. Sorry, Azure DevOps migration tool. So I'll have to go and have a look for that URL. I haven't used it recently, but I can certainly.
If I just Google Azure DevOps migration tool, I should find whatever I need.
I would expect so.
Yeah, I think that'll do it. Sorry, I mean Bing, not Google. Bing
Whichever one you like.
I'll ask G.
Anthony, is this something you could share with us that we could post on our Slack group? Post this if you can't find it now.
Yes. I'm kind of thinking it should be the #1 thing here. There's the migration guide. So that's exactly what you want just there. So I'll definitely share that with you. You can put it on the Slack group for sure.
All right, much appreciated.
Okay. Download the migration guide and get started today. That's exactly what you want. All right.
Thank you.
So guys, you're all pizzaed up there. So I might just quickly touch on Azure Artifacts, and then I'll show you what we do ourselves. Does that work for you guys?
That's good.
All right. And Artifacts is nice and quick anyway. So Azure Artifacts is basically package management. What sets it apart is both good and bad at the moment. Right now, it's an added cost. So if you've got a Visual Studio Enterprise license, you get this included. If you don't and you're on an EA, an enterprise agreement, you'll be paying probably $4 a month per developer that uses it. Otherwise, it's probably $6.50 a month per developer. This is likely to change for the better. So what is nice about this is that it's kind of, a lot of enterprises that use NPM, they use NuGet, they use Maven, they use a wide variety of package managers because they have a variety of different application types and platforms. The challenge with that is that then you've got to manage it with all sorts of different, you've got to manage it in different places. If you wanted to use NuGet, and you wanted to share binaries just within the organization, you don't want to publish them up to the public NuGet repository. You don't want your IP going out there. So you look at an on-prem solution. You might go and get ProGet or MyGet or any of those sorts of tools. But then that's another surface you need to manage, another set of securities and permissions. So Azure Artifacts is something that can consolidate many of the most common ones together into a single place. Okay, and it's also very, very easy to use. So if I go, whoops, the wrong one. If I go across to here, okay, so here's my Parts Unlimited. I click on Artifacts, and I'm going to go and say that I want to create a new feed. This feed is going to be Adelaide Parts Unlimited. What did I click on there? No idea. Adelaide Parts Unlimited shared. So there's the name of a feed. I want people in my organization can use this, or only specific people. Do you want to use upstream public sources, or do I want to force people to use packages here? I'll say create. And just like that, I've created an endpoint for my feeds. Okay. If I were to go and click on connect to feed, you'll see here for NuGet, I can grab the URL, the pointer to the JSON file, and copy it. If I go across to Visual Studio, up to Tools, Package Manager, Settings, I can go into my package sources and say I want to add another one. I'll call it the Adelaide shared feed, and I can paste in the URL, click on update, and I can move that up so that we go there first. And just like that, I can now go and consume packages from that feed. When I publish them, it's the exact same. If I wanted to go and create a new NuGet package to share across my other teams, I simply go and package it, then publish it up to Azure Artifacts, and then my other developers can easily consume that. But what's nice is that this works for NuGet, NPM, Maven, Gradle, Python, and that list will grow. We're looking at CocoaPods. We're also looking at a couple of others. Okay, and in terms of securing it, I use the same security groups, the same teams and things that I use for everything else in Azure DevOps. We've also got a new one called Universal Packages. Universal Packages is backed by Azure Blob Storage, which is the single cheapest storage you can possibly get. And Universal Packages basically allows us to treat any arbitrary file or group of files just as though you would for a NuGet package. So I can go and get these couple of files, zip them up, and then just version them, put them up in this Universal Packages feed, and then from a command line I can pull them down anywhere as part of a build, as part of a PowerShell script, a batch file, whatever you like. That's quite impressive. I've got customers already using Universal Packages to version things like ARM templates. So as part of the build, it goes and fetches the ARM template, the most recent version of the ARM template, and then goes and uses a task to apply that ARM template to Azure. I've got customers that actually put containers there. So as part of the build, we go across, use Universal Packages to pull down a container or a layer that we want to use in the pipeline. So any file type you can think of, we could just use as a Universal Package and treat it in terms of discovery and versioning the same way we do with the any other binary package type. So that's quite impressive. Where this will move in the future is we want to look more at governance. So, you probably be aware of a few things that have happened in the last, say, 12 months in the area of packages. There was one only just in the last couple of weeks. Someone else at the door, David? Are they still on the phone? Okay. Just recently, there was a package where they embedded some malware that scanned the local machine looking for Bitcoin vaults and tried to grab those back. So what we want to do is we want to be able to move this into the area of governance so that we can use existing services that provide whitelists and blacklists of these things, so that when a developer tries to pull down a package, we'll go and check where that package came from. We'll check whitelists and blacklists before we allow that package to come through. So we'll be able to use this as a gate, which will be really important. And we'll also be able to do scanning of these things. So that's the roadmap for some of the things that are going to happen to Azure artifacts. All right. Let's have a look at some of the things that we do internally. So in terms of pipelines, I'll finish off by showing you what it's like to check code into master and what exactly happens when people do that. Okay, so if I were to go to, let's go, say here, I've got one. So if you have a look at the URL up the top there, what you'll see is dev.azure.com mseng. Mseng is Microsoft Engineering. This is our production. This is where we build Azure DevOps. What you're looking at here, these are pull requests that have been completed in the last 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 17 minutes, and so on. So I'll just scroll down randomly and click one. All right. So we've done a lot of things there, and I'm still not seeing quite what I want. We should be seeing tests across the top, and it's not playing nicely. So that's just not good. And I don't think I've got a screenshot I can fall back to either. So the net result is, for a pull request, what we should see is the number of tests shown across the top. And today that's going to be something like 84,170 odd unit tests executing in just shy of 7.5 minutes. So every time a developer attempts to check some code in, it goes away, it builds it. It goes and runs our L0 and L1 tests. That's going to be something like, 84,000 tests. That's going to take about 7.5 minutes. When we run those tests, if you run a test once and then without changing the deployment, the configuration, or any of the environment, you run the same test 50 times, what should happen? We should get the same results 50 times. So we actually literally do this. And what we've found is we struggled with some flaky tests. So we actually run those tests, and if we don't get identical results 50 times, we quarantine the test as an unreliable test. When you're running about 84,000 tests, you generally get about 250 tests that are unreliable. So we move them off to the side, we put them on an engineering scorecard, and developers need to fix those. So we sort of run a large number of tests. And if there's any challenges or issues there, we quarantine those tests. It's so less impactful if when you can't see those numbers come up. Okay, so that happens every single pull request. We get about 250 to 260 pull requests every single day. Okay. Now we also have these other tests, L2s and L3s. These are the equivalent of functional tests like Selenium tests, coded UI, those sorts of things. And what you're looking at here is what that looks like. Generally speaking, we are green all the time, generally. Okay, so most of our testing, 84,000 tests, are done as unit tests, L0s, L1s. We then run about 2,000 fully functional tests here. The blue ones just haven't run yet. We do get occasional red ones. What's very, very rare is to see more than one red at a time. So if a test goes red, it really stands out here. And what you'll find is the team will action that straight away, and it would be most uncommon to see that red one appear a second time running. So we do keep master pretty much in a deployable state at all times. Okay, when we're ready to deploy, let's have a look at what a release looks like. So we learned to do releasing very quickly. So if we need to across the globe, we can get out a priority 1 hotfix. in a matter of minutes. We don't choose to release that quickly. You know, we got fast, but the problem is you release, and then you found you had a problem, and now you've actually now deployed that problem out through a lot of different regions. So what we do is we choose to actually slow down. One of the first things we do is, firstly, we have multiple rings, and each of those rings have multiple scale units around the globe. Okay, so step one, in terms of security, don't assume you haven't been breached, do the opposite. Assume you have. So the first thing we do when we start a deployment is we rotate every secret. So all of our production passwords across all zones, all of our PATs, we actually start and we rotate every single one of them. We then deploy to ring 0. Ring 0 is us. It's our production. It's MSeng. So we deploy to us first. We split, so we deploy the binaries first, and then we wait. If there are no problems, we then service the database. Whenever we've deployed the binaries, we have the option of rolling the binaries back. That's comparatively easy. As soon as we've serviced the database, there is no rollback. Okay, so send the binaries out, wait. And why are we waiting? We're waiting to see if there's any problems. If there are no problems, let's go ahead and do the database. And if ring 0 is successful, we then move out to ring 1. Now, right now, ring 1 is in Brazil. Why do we choose to go out to Brazil? Because it's a comparatively smaller data center. It's 1 to 1.5 million user accounts, and it's in US time zones. And what we're looking for here is we want to test the breadth of the product. So internally, we almost exclusively use Git for our version control, but a lot of our enterprise customers use TFVC. So when we go to Brazil, we're actually getting, people using TFVC, and we're testing the breadth of the product, that, things that wouldn't have been picked up in ring 0. So we do that testing here. If everything works okay there, we wait. We then deploy out to ring 2. Okay, that's Central US, Canada, and West US 2. Okay, so we've increased the number of users now proportionally. If there's no problems there, we then roll out to ring 3. That's where we start bringing in our European data centers and the rest of our US data centers. And we wait. If that's all good, we move out to ring 4. Okay, in ring 4, we deploy out to Singapore, East Asia. That's where Australia resides, so SU7's Australia. Okay. If that all works, we then go to the rest of our scale units in ring 5. And then as soon as we're finished, the last thing we do is re-rotate all the passwords again, so that if there is a breach, a leak of any secrets, we've limited the period of time for which those secrets could be used to do anything. Okay. These days, we generally choose for that entire process to take 2 weeks. Okay. Which is often surprising for people. In fact, we're still deploying to ring 5 when in fact we've probably got the next deployment queued up and on its way as well. So we've generally got multiple versions of the service moving through those channels at any given point in time. If we need to go quick, we can go quick. If there's got to be a hotfix to ring 5, there's processes in place. We can literally go 0 to and straight to 5, and then trickle it out through the rest. We can go through all of them at once if we need to. But for a good deployment experience, we generally now find we want to take 2 weeks to do this to limit the blast radius. So if there is a problem, we find it earlier and minimize the impact of that. We get it fixed before we then go out to the remaining scale units. And that seems to work really well for us. But we use Azure Pipelines to deploy Azure Pipelines. That's what it looks like. And I'm still really bummed I didn't get to show you the pull request with 84,000 tests in it. Damn it. All right, guys. Well, hopefully the pizza was good. Were there any last minute questions there before I let you get on with your Wednesday evening?
How do you How do you deploy to like an app store so that your mobile and tablet users can just download?
Okay, so we use App Center Test for that. So App Center Test, it was previously, what the heck was it called? Was it Hockey App? I can't remember. So App Center Test allows us to go and deploy applications out to, and this is a public thing. I mean, people can sign up for it. Oh my God, I can't remember what the URL for App Center is. There. All right, here's proof that I travel way too much. So if I were to go and sign in to App Center, I've got a little sample application called Select Seat Reminder. And what Select Seat Reminder does is it basically tells me when Qantas released the first 2 rows of economy. Because I like to sit in 4C. So on a 737 with a domestic flight, 4C is here's a tip, that's the best seat. So it's an aisle and it's the first row in economy. So you're on a bulkhead, so you get extra leg room. You guys are all going, this guy travels way too much. So what App Center does is App Center basically allows you to work with those app stores. So it works with both Google Play, it works with the Windows Store, it also works with iTunes. And I can go in here, it's got basically apps, we can build the applications, we can create the APKs, the IPKs in here. We can go into test and work with various device sets. So one of the biggest challenges with mobile applications is working with devices or getting devices. So for example, with my application, I choose to test it against a Google Pixel 2 and a Galaxy S9. I've got a Pixel 3 there. I should also go and add a Pixel 3 now for my applications running Android 9. So we test it here. We then go into distribute, and that allows me to go in there and specify groups. So I can deploy it internally. I can deploy it to dog foods. I can go into the store and choose to deploy it, and I choose to deploy my little application just to the Google Play Store. So App Center is basically the product offering that we've got for managing the deployment, testing, and distribution of mobile applications. And under the cover, it's actually using Azure Pipelines now.
Is there any plans to make DevOps a bit more mobile friendly and include some of the other modules in like on a mobile phone or something like that, like pipelines or? So it's been a question that's been brought up many times over the years, and the short answer is yes, where it makes sense. So basically we're prioritizing the backlog there. It has been pushed back, I know, as we tried to improve the responsiveness of the UI, as we focused on GDPR, which was massive for us, and the rebranding, relaunching. So that sort of slowed a lot of the development work down. We've now got mobile-friendly web forms. We've been evolving those now for quite a while. Does it really make sense, though, to put something like pipelines onto a mobile device? I mean, if you have a look at the complexity of a lot of the typical releases where you've got multiple stages across multiple environments, how would you really want to see that on a phone? What about just triggering a build or something like that, just something basic as opposed to editing one?
I honestly haven't tried. Have you tried that recently, and it's a very subpar experience?
Yeah, you've got to go to the full site to do it. You can do it if like not optimized. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I guess the short answer to the question is I'm not sure where that currently resides on our backlog.
That's right.
Sorry, I wish I had a better, more concrete answer there for you. Any other questions? Okay, well, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, and hopefully there's been a little nugget or something interesting for you to see as we've gone through the session there tonight. So it's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.